As I drove on Highway 666, I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was being watched. The road was eerily quiet, and there were no other cars in sight. The only sound that broke the silence was the engine of my car. I turned on the radio to try and distract myself, but all I could hear was static. Suddenly, I saw something move in the distance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person. They were standing in the middle of the road, facing away from me. I hit the brakes and came to a stop just a few feet away from them. I honked my horn, but they didn't move. I rolled down my window and called out to them, but they didn't respond. I got out of my car and approached them slowly, but as I got closer, I realized something was wrong. Their back was facing me, and they were completely still. I reached out to touch them, but as soon as I did, they turned around. I stumbled back, gasping in horror. Their face was completely twisted, and their eyes were empty sockets. They let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the night, and then they disappeared. I was completely shaken, but I knew I had to keep driving. I got back in my car and continued down the road. The sky had turned a sickly shade of green, and the air felt thick and heavy. I felt like I was suffocating. As I drove, I saw more and more strange things. I saw animals with twisted bodies, and plants that glowed with an unnatural light. The road seemed to stretch on forever, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare. I felt my heart race as I realized that I was completely alone. I was too far from civilization and too far from the nearest town. All I could see was the endless desert stretching out in front of me. The only sound was the rumble of my car's engine. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I reminded myself that I had driven on this highway many times before and nothing had ever happened. But as the miles ticked by, the darkness seemed to grow thicker and the silence more oppressive. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding as I tried to avoid hitting it. But as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't a person at all. It was a scarecrow, arms outstretched in a grotesque parody of humanity. I let out a sigh of relief as I drove past it, feeling foolish for my momentary panic. But as I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw the scarecrow moving. Its arms were now pointed in the direction I was driving, as if it was urging me to go on. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had to be imagining things. But as I drove further down the highway, more scarecrows appeared. Some were hanging from trees, others propped up against telephone poles. Each one seemed to be urging me onward. My unease grew as I realized that I was now surrounded by them. I tried to speed up, but my car seemed to be struggling to move. It was as if the scarecrows were holding me back. Just then, my headlights illuminated a figure standing in the middle of the road. This time, I knew it wasn't a scarecrow. It was a man, dressed in tattered clothes, with wild eyes and a crazed grin. Finally, I saw a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, grateful for the chance to get out of the car and stretch my legs. But as soon as I got out, I realized something was wrong. The gas station was abandoned, and there was no sign of life anywhere. I walked around the station, trying to find something to help me. But all I found was a note scrawled on the wall in red paint. It read, "Get out while you still can." I knew I had to listen. I got back in my car and drove as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I reached the next town, hours later. When I finally stopped, I was exhausted, but I knew I had to tell someone what had happened. I went to the police station and told them everything. At first, they didn't believe me. But when they checked the records, they found that Highway 666 had been closed for years. They never found out what had happened to me on that road. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget it. The memory of that night still haunts me, and I know I'll never be able to drive on a lonely road again without thinking of the horrors that wait in the darkness. I never went back to Highway 666 again. But even now, years later, I can't shake the feeling that the evil entities are still out there, waiting for their next victim. Now let's hop onto story number 2. But before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I am a paranoid driver. Not a regular one too. And maybe that's why I tend to overthink most situations. As I continued driving down the dark, lonely road, my mind couldn't help but race with thoughts of what could happen. What if my car broke down and I was stranded in the middle of nowhere? What if someone or something was following me? The fear continued to build inside of me, and I had to take a few deep breaths to try and calm down. But then I saw something up ahead on the road, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a person, walking along the side of the road. At first, I thought about stopping to offer them a ride, but my fear quickly took over. What if they were dangerous? What if they had ill intentions? I decided to keep driving, hoping they wouldn't try to stop me. As I passed by the person, I couldn't help but glance over to get a better look. But what I saw made my blood run cold. The person's eyes were completely black, and their skin was a sickly shade of gray. They didn't look like any normal human being I had ever seen before. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, and I kept looking in my rearview mirror to see if anyone or anything was behind me. That's when I saw a car with its headlights off, following me from a distance. My heart started racing as I tried to think of what to do next. I knew I had to lose the car that was following me, so I stepped on the gas pedal and started driving faster. But the other car didn't seem to be giving up, and it was getting closer and closer. I felt like I was in a movie, and I was the main character being chased by a villain. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw a gas station up ahead. I quickly turned into the parking lot and parked my car, hoping that the other car would keep driving past me. I sat there for a few moments, trying to catch my breath and calm down. But then I saw the other car pull into the gas station. I could hear the engine idling, and I knew that whoever was in that car wasn't going to let me go. I had to think fast. I looked around the gas station, hoping to find someone who could help me. But the place was deserted, and there wasn't a single soul in sight. I knew I was on my own. I made the decision to confront whoever was in the other car. I got out of my car and walked over to the other vehicle. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see inside. But I knew that someone was in there, watching me. I knocked on the driver's side window, hoping that whoever was inside would roll it down. But nothing happened. I knocked again, louder this time, but still no response. That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Can I help you with something?" I turned around to see a police officer standing there. I had never been so relieved in my life. I quickly explained the situation to him, and he went over to the other car to investigate. It turned out that the person following me was a criminal on the run from the law. The police officer was able to apprehend him, and I was finally able to breathe a sigh of relief. But even though the danger had passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been followed for a reason. Was it just a random encounter, or was someone after me specifically? The fear continued to haunt me long after the incident had ended, and I knew that I would never forget that night for as long as I would be alive. Buckle up, because I have a spine-tingling tale that will send shivers down your spine. It's the kind of story that you would tell around a campfire, but in this case, you're in the driver's seat, cruising down a deserted highway in the middle of the night in America. It was late, and I had been driving for hours. I was on my way to meet my family for the holidays, but I had gotten a late start and now found myself in the middle of nowhere with nothing but the darkness to keep me company. The radio was filled with static, and my phone had no service, leaving me in complete isolation. As I drove, my eyes were fixed on the road ahead, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was as if the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Suddenly, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but there was nothing there. I shrugged it off and continued driving, but the unease stayed with me. As I drove on, the feeling of being watched became stronger. I checked my mirrors, but there was nothing there. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind kept wandering, and my thoughts became more and more paranoid. Finally, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, but but it was too late. I hit the figure, and my car spun out of control, crashing into a ditch. As I struggled to regain my senses, I realized that the figure was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. I got out of the car and looked around, but there was no one there. It was as if the figure had vanished into thin air. I tried to start my car, but it wouldn't start. I was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with no one to turn to for help. I decided to start walking, hoping to find a phone or a gas station. As I walked, the feeling of being watched became stronger. It was as if someone or something was following me, but every time I turned around, there was no one there. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it stayed with me, haunting me every step of the way. Finally, I saw light in the distance. It was a gas station, and I ran towards it, hoping to find help. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The figure I had hit with my car was standing in front of the gas station, staring at me with blank eyes. I froze, unsure of what to do. The figure started walking towards me, and I realized that it wasn't human. It was something else entirely. It had no face, no features, just a dark, shadowy outline. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to get away from that thing. I ran for what felt like hours, until I collapsed from exhaustion. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. The doctors told me that I had been found by the side of the road, delirious and babbling about a shadowy figure. They said I had been lucky to survive, but I knew the truth. I had encountered something that shouldn't exist, something that lurked in the darkness, waiting to claim its next victim. So, if you're ever driving alone in the middle of the night in America, be careful. You never know what's lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. And if you see a figure standing in the shadows, run in the opposite direction. It was just an ordinary night when I took my truck and headed out onto the highway. I had been driving for years, and nothing ever fazed me. But tonight was different. As soon as I merged onto the highway, I felt a chill run down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The road was dark and deserted, and there wasn't a single car in sight. The only sound was the hum of my engine and the occasional screech of an owl. But then I saw it, a figure standing on the side of the road. It was a woman, her long hair blowing in the wind. I couldn't see her face, but I knew something was wrong. I slowed down, thinking maybe she needed help. But as I got closer, she disappeared into thin air. I shook my head, thinking it must have been my imagination. But then it happened again. This time, it was a man. He appeared out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, narrowly avoiding hitting him. But as I looked closer, I realized something was off. His eyes were hollow, and his skin was gray. I quickly turned my attention back to the road, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over me. But the worst was yet to come. As I continued driving, the mist started to roll in. At first, it was just a light fog, but then it thickened, almost obscuring the road ahead. I could barely see where I was going. And then, I saw them, figures in the mist, their forms indistinct and ghostly. I swerved to avoid hitting them, but they seemed to be everywhere, surrounding my truck. I could hear their whispers, their moans, their cries. It was like they were trying to pull me into the mist, to drag me down into some otherworldly realm. I slammed on the accelerator, trying to get away from the haunted highway. But the mist seemed to be following me, chasing me down like a pack of hungry wolves. It was like I was driving through some sort of nightmare. And then I saw it, a figure looming up ahead, larger than any of the others. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman, her hair blowing in the wind. But this time, there was something different about her. Her eyes glowed with a sinister light, and her lips twisted into a grotesque smile. I tried to brake, but it was too late. My truck plowed into her, and I felt her body thud against the windshield. I screamed, feeling like I was going to be sick. But as I looked closer, I realized there was something even worse than her twisted, broken body. It was the realization that she wasn't alone. Dozens of ghostly figures swarmed around my truck, their eyes glowing with malice. I could hear their whispers, their laughter, their screams. And then, all at once, they vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. I don't know how I made it home that night. I don't know how I survived the haunted highway. But I do know one thing: I will never forget the feeling of driving through that mist, with the ghosts of the dead chasing me down. It was a horror unlike any other, a nightmare that will haunt me for the rest of my life. The engine of my truck roared as I barreled down the highway. The only thing illuminating the road ahead of me were my headlights. It was late and I was eager to make it to my destination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it until I looked in my side mirrors and saw a thick, rolling mist following me. It wasn't just any mist though, it was alive, almost like it had a mind of its own, and it was gaining on me. I pressed harder on the gas, trying to outrun the mist, but it was no use. It seemed to be gaining on me, getting closer and closer with each passing second. My heart was racing as I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't stop or slow down. I needed to keep moving, but I couldn't outrun this thing forever. As the mist drew closer, I could feel it starting to seep into my truck through any crack or crevice it could find. It was cold and damp, like a living thing, and I could see it swirling around inside the cab. I tried to shake it off, but it clung to me, wrapping around my arms and legs like tendrils. It was then that I noticed the strange shapes in the mist. They looked like people, but distorted, twisted, and mangled. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, and they seemed to be reaching out for me, their fingers stretched wide. I tried to ignore them, but their presence was suffocating, like a weight on my chest. I knew then that I was in serious trouble. I was being hunted by something that shouldn't exist, something otherworldly and dangerous. I had to find a way to shake it off, to escape its grasp. I began to think back to the stories my father used to tell me as a child, stories of spirits and creatures that haunted the night. He had always warned me to be careful when driving on long, deserted highways, to always keep my wits about me. I had laughed at him then, thinking he was just trying to scare me, but now his words seemed more prescient than ever. I tried to remember all the stories he had told me, hoping to find some clue, some way to defeat this creature that was chasing me. And then I remembered the one story he had told me about the mist. He said that mist like this was a harbinger of death, a sign that something terrible was coming. He had said that the only way to defeat it was to face it head on, to look it in the eye and not back down. I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and turned to face the mist, determined to stare it down. It was like staring into the void, a swirling mass of nothingness, but I refused to back down. I held its gaze, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. And then, just like that, it was gone. The mist dissipated as if it had never been there, leaving me alone on the highway once again. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath, wondering what had just happened. Had it been real, or just my imagination? I may never know for sure, but one thing is certain: I will never forget that night on the highway, when I was chased by mist and lived to tell the tale. Highway 666, also known as the Devil's Highway, was known to be one of the most haunted roads in America. Legends said that it was cursed, that demons roamed the stretch of road, and that people who traveled on it at night would never be seen again. But I didn't believe in any of that. I was a rational person, and I knew that there had to be a scientific explanation for everything. One night, however, I found myself driving on Highway 666. It was a decision I had made on a whim, a shortcut to get me to my destination faster. As soon as I turned onto the road, I felt a chill run down my spine. The road was dark and winding, and there was no one else around. I tried to shake off the feeling and turned up the radio to keep me company. But the further I drove, the more uneasy I became. The radio started to crackle and fade, and then it went silent. I tried switching to another station, but they were all static. It was as if I had entered a dead zone. Then, I saw something move in the shadows. At first, I thought it was an animal, but as it got closer, I realized it was a person. A figure dressed in black, standing on the side of the road. I couldn't make out their face, but I could feel their eyes on me, watching me. I tried to ignore them and kept driving, but then I saw more figures. Dozens of them, lining the road. Some were holding torches, others were standing still, watching me. I felt like I was in a nightmare, trapped in a world that didn't make sense. As I drove on, I saw that the road was changing. The trees that lined the road were gnarled and twisted, and the ground beneath me was hot. I felt like I was driving through hell itself. And then, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. I hit the figure, and then everything went dark. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My car had been found at the side of the road, but there was no sign of the figure I had hit. The doctors said I had suffered a head injury, and that my memory might be affected. But I knew what I had seen. I knew that Highway 666 was cursed, and that the demons that roamed it were real. From that day on, I never drove on that road again. And I warned everyone I knew to stay away from the Devil's Highway. Because once you enter, you may never come back.